Hello, it's Abbott Austin again, and here for another class, the 9th class in our spirituality course. This ninth class will be on hoping for things other than God. Okay, so in the previous one, I spoke about hoping for God and the theological virtue of hope. So there we want God above all else. We want to have God, and so as to enjoy God in the fullest sense. And we need hope for that because it's not easy to attain that goal. Okay, so that's one thing, and it's very important. Now I want to say some more about hoping for other things besides God, because it's a practically important thing I referred to in the end of the last video, but I want to say some more about it. So I'm going to break this down into a few different sections here. There's a lot that can be said about this, and further questions come up, but I'll try to hit some of the main points that are kind of practical in everyday spirituality, living out our lives. So hopefully with God's help we can do that. Okay, so let's start with the question, is it okay, is it right to hope for something other than God? So the answer is, well, in a certain sense, yes, it's okay, but we want to do it in the right way. So to start, let's remember that hope has three conditions to it. Hope itself, at least as an act, not the emotion of hope, but an act of hope, is an act of the will, right? This uplifting movement of the will towards the good, right? So that kind of, rather than this sinking despair towards some good that you want, there's this uplifting movement of the will, right? It renews you and it says, I can do this, I can get the thing I want. Okay, so that's what hope itself is, but there's three conditions for that to occur. One is that you want something, right? It's kind of the most obvious. You want something. Second, there is something between you and what you want, a difficulty, an obstacle of some sort. So it's the second condition. Third condition is that you think that this obstacle between you and what you want can be overcome, right? So those three conditions I talked about in the last video. Okay, so the first condition is that you want something. So let's look at that first, right? And this will help us to see in what way or how hoping for other things besides God can be good and is good. And indeed, we should do it, but how we should do it. Okay, so wanting other things besides God. Let me throw out this statement and let's examine it. Let's kind of kick the tires of it. So here's a statement. Not only God, but other things are needed for full human well-being. Not only God, but other things are needed for full human well-being. Okay, so full human well-being, remember, is salvation, right? We're completely fulfilled, completely satisfied, fullness of joy, so forth, right? So not only God is needed for that, but other things as well. Okay, that's the proposition, so to speak, here. That's what's being considered. This as a claim, and now we want to examine, is that true? Okay, so, and then an argument of it being true, we could say things like, well, yeah, I mean, to be fully alive, to be fully well, right, salvation, we need bodily health, right? So that's something other than God. So I need bodily health. I need health in order to be. So there's something, an example to prove the point. I need that in order to be fulfilled. You might also argue things like I need friends. I need to have friends. And then so that'd be something else besides God. Okay, so in this view then, God is one among many good things that we need for our fulfillment, for our salvation. Right? So God is one among many things that we need. Granted, in this view, you could say that he is the greatest thing we need, the deepest thing that we need, what we need most of all. But still, there's other things that we need in order to be fulfilled. So God is one among other good things, the greatest, but still one among others. Okay, so that would follow. Okay, this is false. Okay, so now this is very difficult you have to explain why it's false, and then see. It's easy to draw a conclusion from me saying it's false. Like, oh, so all you need is God, you ignore these things. Okay, it's false because it relies upon a misconception of what God is. God is not one among many things. God's not a being in the way that other things are a being, right? So it's not just like, God's one thing, my bodily health is one thing, friends are another thing, and so forth and so on. No, God is the transcendent one, right? God is over all things. God's not one. He's not in this creation as one among others, right? So there's a fundamental misconception here about God. And the truth is that when we attain God, right, in the full sense, right, full union with God that we're after, this is what we'll have in heaven. When you attain God, you get everything, right? Nothing is lacking because all good things are in God, right? God created all the good things. So all the goodness that we need is found in God. Nothing is lacking once we have this full loving union with God. We're absorbed in God. Okay, so once we attain God, there is nothing else to want. Okay, because that's the nature of it. That's who God is. Now, you'll say, well, that means in heaven there's no one else to be friends with. No, it doesn't follow. That's not incompatible with what I'm saying. But, even if there were no one else, there is. But even if there weren't, you'd have everything you need in God. Okay, so God is not one among other things. So this statement, not only God, but other things are needed for full human well-being, it's not true. Okay, at least there's a sense in which it's false, right? Because it's full human well-being we're talking about. And that we have with this full union with God, and nothing else will be wanting to you at that point. Okay, because that's you've achieved the fullness of it. Okay, this is practically important for this reason. Let's say you're going through life and then you encounter a situation in which you have to choose between God and another good thing that you need, right? So let's say, you're going through life and bodily health is something you want. You need that for your well-being. That's right? It's part of full human well-being, bodily health, right? When we attain God in the full sense, God will make sure He will, in His goodness, will have full integrity of our body. Our body will be fully alive, right? So God will grant that. God will bring that about Himself. Okay, but let's say you're going through life now, and you get to a point where, I need bodily health, okay, but I also need God. And then I get to a point where, let's say, in order to be true to God, I have to sacrifice something about my health. Let's say, like the martyrs, right? If I'm going to be true to God and stick to God, then I have to be willing to expose myself to persecution and even death. So I won't have bodily health. Okay, so what about that point? Well, if the statement I gave that God's one among other things that we need for then at that point you despair of ever attaining full human well-being, if that were true, because you might say, okay, well, I have to choose God because God's the greater good, and this my bodily health is the lesser good. So at least I have the greater good. I won't be as miserable if I had only this lesser good and didn't have the greater good. Okay, but you still wouldn't be fully happy because you need both bodily health and God, right? So when you choose God and you sacrifice your bodily health, you're never going to be fully happy. You're always going to be somewhat unhappy, somewhat unfulfilled. Okay, and that leads to a certain despair because we won't attain full human well-being. That is, we won't attain our salvation. We'll never be completely at rest. Okay, that's what follows if we hold that view. But that's not what we think. We think when we attain God, right, so we might be killed, persecuted, and killed, and so forth for following God. But when we attain God, God will bring about our bodily health, right? So if you look at the book of Maccabees, I'm trying to remember which one and the passage, but it's the Maccabean Martyrs. Okay, so one of them, as he's going to his death, says, the Lord gave me like these limbs and these bodies because they're going to torture him and cut him off and horrible things, right? But he hopes to get them back in the kingdom, right? And when God restores things. So there's this hope in the resurrection, getting his body back. So that's our hope. So when we attain God, God will bring all that about, and we'll have everything we need. So there is still hope, even when we have in this life, we have to choose sometimes between God and some other lesser good. Okay. So it's not true that God's just one among other things that we need. God is as Aquinas would say, the ultimate end, the last end, right? And by definition, and Augustine says this sort of thing too, by definition, when we have that, we'll have all that we need. Okay? All right. So that's important. Think about that. It's a lot to think about, I know. But it's very important. So this statement, not only God, but other things are needed for full human well-being, not true. Okay, it's false. All right, now I want to qualify what I'm saying, or at least clarify so there's not a misunderstanding here. Okay, that full union with God, the full possession of God, to be possessed by God, to enjoy God in the fullest sense, that's not in this life, though. Okay, obviously. So, but that's what we hope for in the next life, to have that. And that's what we're going after. Okay, in this life, we don't have that full face-to-face union with God, full absorption into the life of the Trinity. Or we don't have that, okay? So we still strive to become closer and closer to God, to approach that full union with God, right? And we can reach certain heights of that, right? The saints have. And so that's something to strive for, and we can really hope to attain even in this life. But still, we don't have the full union with God in this life. So, in this life, we do need the help of certain things in order to kind of nourish that journey to God, to support us in that journey to God. And so, in this life, yes, we do need other things. Okay? So, we should want those other things. We should want bodily health as much as possible in this life. Right? We know it's not going to last forever. So, there'll be a point where we get sick and die. But this is what we want, and we should want it. Okay? And we should want it as contributing to our fulfillment in God. Okay, so not only God, but other things are needed for full human well-being. Okay, false. Because remember, God's transcendent. God's just not one among others. Okay, but it's true that we should want other things besides God. And not for the sake, even for the sake of our salvation, for our full human well-being. Right? In this life, we should want other things. Right? And so what's the case here? We want them in such a way that they contribute, right, to our attainment of God, to that full human well-being in God, salvation in God, right? So the way to want other things besides God is to want them in a way that contributes to our attainment of God, right? Contributes to our attainment of God, even contributes to other people attaining God as well. Okay, so that's it. Now recall a couple videos ago, a couple classes ago, when we talked about charity, I think it was in that one, I talked about attachments, and you can be attached to something when you have this, this clinging love for it. And there's two ways you can do that. You can actually want something as if it were God, right? And then that'd be an attachment for sure. Okay, so there, maybe something like, let's say this young lady says, all I want is, to marry so-and-so, have a nice house and a nice family, some kids, and live in a nice house, and so that's all I want. Okay, that's understandable. I'm not trying to demonize someone who says something like this, but it's still wrong. It's not all you want, right? As Christians, what we want is God, ultimately. And so we want, so this young lady would want a husband, want a family, in a way that contributes to her attainment of God and also contributes to their attainment of God, right? To the attainment of God by her husband and by her children, right? So the tradition speaks of all this in a way as ordering everything towards God, or referring everything towards our salvation. Okay, so we're attached to something, though, if we put it in the place of God. So if we say, that's all I want, that's kind of indicating, well, you're satisfied with that alone, or simply that, right? And that's not, you shouldn't want all that. You want all that, or you want these things in order to help you towards God. So it's not all you want. It's something very important you want, but you still want to go further and attain God. So one way we don't want things correctly is to want them in a way that's replacing God, as if that's our ultimate happiness and those things. Okay, not good. Okay, but there's another way in which we can be attached to something, and that is we can want it in such a way that it gets in the way of our attainment of God. So it's not that we think that we'll find our happiness in it and we're completely invested, but we cling to it too much, right? We cling to it too much so that it gets in the way, of that. So here, say a person, wants God, but is going to hold on to something, perhaps understanding that this is going to, normally might be helpful for attaining God, but sometimes we have to let go of things, and sometimes we hold on to them too much, and then that gets in the way. So that's another way in which we can be attached. We cling to things, we hold on to them, we want them too much. So we don't want them in a way that's ordered to God then. Okay, so if we're going to hope for things other than God, we have to want them in this sense, in a way ordered to God, We want them referred to God. We want them in a way that contributes to our attainment of God, as well as to the for other people as well to attain God. Okay, so that's the way we want it. Okay, let's move on. Let's look at this then with some concrete examples. So I mentioned bodily health. Let me throw out some other things that are things we want as part of our fulfillment. We have a kind of a natural longing for them. Friends, I threw out an example of friends, I think, before. Another thing is to be treated rightly by other people, right? You want to be treated rightly. Those are all things that are right to want, we should want, we naturally want. Okay, and so now let's look at the other conditions of hoping. So you want it, but there's some obstacle between you and what you want. And then to hope means you would think that those obstacles can be overcome. All right, so let's look at bodily health. Let's say it's something you want, you're right to want it, and there's a difficulty though. You have some disease, you have an illness, so you don't have full bodily health. And let's say, many of us know people who have cancer. Right, so that becomes an obstacle, a difficulty to be overcome in order to have bodily health. So the question becomes, can it be overcome? And if it can, then you hope for it. And that encourages you to work for it, to go through all the treatments, to persevere, not to give up in hoping for your bodily health, okay? So that's good, right? That can be rightly done. Okay, but sometimes you get to a point where the cancer is not going to go away, right? And you have to, in a way, let go of what you wanted, right? So this is very, very difficult and painful, but people have to do it, right? They have to, sometimes in, say, their cancer treatment, they get to a point where it's not going to work. The cancer is going to eventually lead to death. So what happens? Do you keep hoping for bodily health? Well, in one sense, yes, in the next life, because God will bring it about. Right? So we can still hope for bodily health in the next life. But in this life, no. Right? 'Cause that's part of what we wanted, really, right? We wanted to have bodily health in this life as well. So at a certain point, you have to let go. So in a certain sense, this hope dies. That is the hope for bodily health in this life. That hope dies, right? With the theological virtue of hope, which is a hope for God, and we trust in God's help to get God. We never give up. We never despair. We never let go. We should never let go of hope, right? Remember, it's a sin to despair in that sense. Okay, but in other things we hope for, sometimes we have to give up the hope. Sometimes we have to let that despair sink in, right? So you let go. You no longer want it. Very, very hard, right? And in many ways, this is the case in life. Very, very hard. So this is something that sometimes we have to do. Now, you still hope for bodily health in the next life, okay? You still hope for that in the next life, and God will bring it about, okay? But in this life, you have to let go of it, right? If you keep trying to get it when it's no longer realistic, it just leads to frustration, disappointment, disillusion. It's not reality-based, all that kind of stuff, right? So it's not good when we hope for and want something that's just no longer attainable. Okay, so you have to let go. Another case would be friends, right? So we want friends, but here think about a particular person as a friend. You want this person to be your friend. And perhaps you were friends for a while, but then something comes up and it becomes an obstacle between you and the friendship. You have to overcome that if the friendship is going to continue, right? And then you have to think, is this obstacle able to be overcome? If it is, you work for it, you work it out, you become friends again, right? That happens, that's good. That's a good case of hoping for something other than God. You want this friendship. Okay, and then what happens though? What happens, I should say, when that obstacle can't be overcome, the friendship can't be mended, let's say, some rupture and it can't be mended. Okay, at some point, you might have to come to the decision that I have to let go of that hope of having this person as a friend because it's just not going to happen. You have to let go and you got to move on, right? So again, the hope for that is not necessarily going to last. Can you hope for that in the life to come? Yeah, that's possible. It's not guaranteed, though. You don't know you don't know if the person's going to be in heaven, right? So in a certain sense, you can hope for friends in heaven, the friendship of God, for one, but also with the saints and the angels. Okay, so you can hope for friends in the next life, but hoping for this particular person as your friend in the next life, You can hope for it, but it's not guaranteed in the way that our salvation is guaranteed if we hope in God and follow his ways. Okay, so another case then. All right, let's look at the other example I gave, right treatment. You want right treatment from others. So someone's not treating you well, so say they're maligning you, they're lying about you behind your back, smearing you. Okay, that's an obstacle. You want right treatment, it's an obstacle to get it. So you try to work it out, and if you can overcome the obstacle, you think you can, there's hope, you work for it. But sometimes someone's going to keep treating you poorly, and you just have to stop wanting right treatment. You have to let go. And you have to stop expecting that person to treat you rightly. Doesn't mean you don't want the person to treat you right. You still want it in a sense, right? So for one, you want it for the good of the other person and love of neighbor. You want that person to do what's right. So the sense that you still want the other person to treat you rightly, but you stop expecting it. So in this way, you stop hoping for it. You let go of expecting in this life, at least for the time being. Okay, and that can be difficult because you're probably angry this person's treating you wrong, and you want it righted. You want the wrong righted. And so it's hard to let go sometimes in this regard. But you have to. It will make you bitter. It will bring you down if you don't let go. All right, so there's another case where the hope is not guaranteed, and you might have to let go of the hope and just, you still want it, but you just have to stop expecting it. You drive yourself crazy, still expecting it and getting angry about it, and you're becoming obsessed with that. Let go and move on, right? You have to do that sometimes. So these are examples of how this is different, right? This is different than our hope for salvation in God, right? We never let go of that hope. Okay, now here's another example to throw in there. Let's say you're hoping to overcome a sin. You have a habitual sin. You keep, giving into the sin. Might be angry outbursts. You're kind of prone to anger, and you get upset, and it's wrong. Okay, it can be lust. It's a common one today. Pornography, so prevalent. People, you want to overcome that. Okay, so you want to overcome this sin, and you want to say to yourself, okay, there's an obstacle. I'm having a hard time overcoming this sin, this habitual sin, this vice, and I need to overcome that. So can that obstacle be overcome? And then you're if you think so, you work for it. But let's say you keep falling into this habitual sin. You keep doing it. And you're like, is it ever okay to give up on that hope? Okay, no. Okay, why? Because we have to, in order to attain God, we have to keep working against our sins. We have to eventually be cleansed of all our sins. God's very patient. So you don't despair of your salvation because you can't break free from the sin, but you also don't despair of God helping you. It can take a while. Sometimes habitual sins are really long time projects. They usually are. So, but you don't despair of overcoming that sin, even though it's very hard and it doesn't happen right away, and you're very frustrated and you want to give up and so forth. Okay, you don't stop working at it. Okay, that's the case where you keep hoping, because it's essentially part of attaining God eventually, overcoming your sins. So you keep working on it, don't despair, keep having hope in God's help, right? So the thing is, we're going deeper and deeper in hoping in God's help. So often we try to rely on our own resources alone, but we learn through some of these trials how much we need God's help, and we get humbled in the process, and we're opened up to God's grace. Very difficult, but we don't despair of that, okay? Don't despair of God's help, just to throw that example in there. All right, so we covered a bit of ground. Let me say one last thing. So again, there's a lot to be said here, and I am going to talk in the next video more about things we need for our salvation besides God. Okay, remember, when we have full human well-being, salvation, and we have God, it's not there's other things that we also need to fill in the holes with. No, God will satisfy all, right? But in this life, the other things that we need to work on and help us in this journey towards our fulfillment. Okay, things that are kind of needed in that sense. Okay, I'll talk more about that in the next video. But one further thought or a thing to say here about these things that we want, rightly want, and we rightly hope for. And I said that there'll be order to God. So let's look a little bit at what that would mean concretely. So again, bodily health. I want health. Okay, you should want it in a way that's ordered to God. You can want it in a way that's not ordered to God, that's not aligned with that goal and doesn't contribute to that goal, right? So you can want it in a kind of way to be, I want to be alive forever. I want to kind of hold on to my life, my earthly life, and not ever go beyond this to the full union with God. So I'm trying to stay alive forever, right? That's not good, right? Some people have tried it. I don't know why, because it seems like a really, they say the two most certain things in life are death and taxes, right? So even if you have no faith, you can see that death is going to happen. Okay, so trying to hold on to it is silly, but people do it. Okay, but you can want health in a way that's referred to God, that contributes to your attainment of God and contributes to other people attaining God. So what that look like? That'd be something like, I want to be healthy so that I can do good works, things that glorify God. I want to do good works that help other people. I want to be healthy just to do good things like recreation and so forth, because that praises God. Whenever I do something that's genuinely good and contributes to my life, that's glorifying God. So I want it in this way to glorify God. Also, if you're healthy, it tends to kind of give you better mental abilities, mental energy. It goes with your bodily health, right? So I can pray better. I can meditate and read and spend time in prayer with God more if I'm healthy, right? So to want health for all those reasons is the way that's ordered towards God. Okay, how about friends? You can want a friend in a way that's not ordered to God. You want a friend just to kind of be a partner in crime, so to speak, to help you with things, to enjoy things, and to live in a certain way that's not ordered to God, right? But you can want a friend in a way that is ordered to God. So that would mean that you want this friend to be kind of a companion in the journey towards God. So that person will help you attain God, but also you're going to help that person attain God, right? So that'd be a way of wanting that in a way ordered to God, so that it contributes to the attainment of God, not only for you, but for your friend as well. Right treatment. You want to be treated rightly because you want to be, you can want that and not care about God, but you can want it in a way that's ordered to God because you want to have good relationships with other people. Because why? Because those good relationships are a reflection of God's kingdom, of the way things are supposed to be, of God's justice and goodness. Also, when you're in good relationships with other people, right, then that becomes the context, the conditions are there to help you and the other people to work out your salvation more with greater ease, as it were, right? When you're in conflict and tension, that becomes a challenge to work out our salvation. God will give us the grace to overcome those challenges, yes, but still it becomes a challenge. So we can want to be treated rightly by others and therefore have good relationships in a way that's ordered towards our attainment of God. Okay, and then, of course, I gave the example of overcoming habitual sin. It can be obvious why that would be ordered to God. All right, so those are some things to think about. Yes, we can want other things. We can hope for them. It's not always guaranteed, though, that we'll get them in this life. But inasmuch as they're needed for our fulfillment, God will give them to us in the next life. It'll be kind of, to speak in a not a great way, but it's kind of part of the package, so to speak. When we get God, He will fulfill every single desire we have, right? And so we can't, if we attain God, keep hoping for God, we can also hope for these other things in the next life when they're needed for our true salvation. All right, I hope that helps. It's very practical. We'll take up some more things about things we need to be fulfilled and how we should pursue them in this life in the next video. God bless.